At first glance, the JBL Charge 5 just seems like another redesign with an overdone logo on the front. But there are actually some very big changes under the hood here. Some that are great and others that aren't so great. So today we are going to check out the new JBL Charge 5, and we're also going to compare it to the JBL Charge 4 and the JBL Charge 3. Maybe you're thinking about getting an upgrade, and this is a pretty solid upgrade. But first, we've got to address pricing. The new Charge 5 has a retail price of $180, which is $30 more than the Charge 4 when it first came out. Now, a few months after the Charge 4 came out, it got a price increase to $180. But then it would list for $150, making you think that you got a deal. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see the same thing with the Charge 5. It has a retail price of $180 now, but in a few short weeks, it'll start going on sale for $150, and maybe even a little less on major holidays. And now that the Charge 5 is here, the Charge 4 is on sale for $130. Regardless, if you want to pick any of these speakers up, they'll be linked down below, but I would wait for the Charge 5 to go on sale. Now, when it comes to the design of this speaker, size-wise, the Charge 5 isn't all that different from the Charge 4 and Charge 3. The Charge 5 is still your typical mid-size speaker that you can easily throw into your backpack and take on the go with you. However, looks-wise, the Charge 5 is a shrunken-down version of the JBL Extreme 3 with that new oversized logo in tow, much to a lot of people's chagrin. Now, personally, I'm over JBL's new design direction because, more importantly, everything else about the Charge 5 is still the same. We've still got those exposed pass radiators on either side, we've got these hard plastic end caps with rubber feet, and we've still got this fabric mesh that not only feels premium and tightly woven, it's also going to be able to easily stand up to constant abuse like bumps and scrapes without any problems. Now, just like its predecessors, the Charge 5 is still waterproof, but this time around, it's rocking an IP67 rating rather than just your IPX7 rating found on both the Charge 4 and Charge 3. Now, the 6 just means that the Charge 5 is also dustproof. But really, this is just marketing to get numbers on the board because dust and dirt were never a problem for the Charge 4 and Charge 3, and they're just as durable. But regardless, if you're looking for a mid-size speaker that you can take on the go with you and not have to worry about it, then the Charge 5 is a solid candidate. But now let's talk about tech specs. When it comes to battery life, the Charge 5 has an advertised battery life of 20 hours just like its predecessors. And the Charge 5 even has a built-in 7,500 mAh battery just like the Charge 4, whereas the Charge 3 does have a slightly smaller battery. Now, just keep in mind that 20-hour battery life is for when this speaker is playing at 50% volume. Real-world use with this speaker playing at 80% volume, I'm getting about 10 hours of playback time, which is not bad at all. But also keep in mind, if you were to use the speaker at a higher volume, then its battery is going to drain faster. However, for me, the Charge 4 has always been good for a little over 11 hours of playback time while at 80% volume. Now, personally, I don't mind the Charge 5's slightly shorter real-world battery life because it does have a new 10-watt tweeter to power, and we'll touch on that in a minute, and the Charge 5 does get noticeably louder than the Charge 4. So for all intents and purposes, the Charge 5 still has an awesome real-world battery life, but personally, I would like to see a 9,000 mAh battery in this guy, or maybe even a 10,000 mAh battery. Regarding connectivity, the Charge 5 has been upgraded to Bluetooth 5.1, but more importantly, it can be connected to 2 devices at the same time, so you and a friend can both be DJ. And performance-wise, there is zero latency across the board when watching movies or videos on your phone, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android device, if you're connected to one device at a time. Because if you're connected to 2 devices at the same time, then a noticeable amount of latency does show up. But now this leads us to the ports on this speaker. The Charge 5 charges via a USB-C port just like the Charge 4, as they should, whereas the Charge 3 charges via a micro USB port. So if you're an Android user, then either the Charge 4 or Charge 5 are great because you can charge your speaker and your phone with the same cable. And just like its predecessors, the Charge 5 still has a USB-A out port so that you can charge your own devices. But unfortunately, the Charge 5 no longer has an audio jack, so you can't use it with a wired connection like you can with these older speakers. And unfortunately, the USB-C port on these speakers are strictly used for charging. Now, I know less and less phones these days have an audio jack, but personally, I feel that a mid-size speaker like the Charge 5 should have an audio jack, because you never know. Personally, what I think JBL should have done is gotten rid of the USB-A port and kept the audio jack instead. Because more and more phones these days are coming included with USB-C cables, so USB-A might not be as popular in the near future. Even iPhones now come included with the USB-C to Lightning cable. So I think JBL should have kept the audio jack just in case, because this is a speaker after all, and have the USB-C port on the Charge 5 both be used for charging the speaker itself and for charging your own devices like you can with the USB-C port found on the Extreme 3. But minor rant aside, it's great that the Charge 5 charges via a USB-C port and you can still use it as a battery bank through its USB-A port, but keep in mind the speaker no longer has an audio jack, so you can only use it wirelessly. But now let's talk about speaker setups, because this is the most important upgrade found on the Charge 5. The JBL Charge 3 has your traditional dual frontward firing transducers and dual pass radiators shooting out its sides, and this speaker is rated at 20 watts. Whereas the Charge 4 is rated at 30 watts, and when it first came out, it did garner a good amount of criticism because it only has a single frontward firing transducer, but it still kept its dual pass radiators. But now with the Charge 5, it has a 30-watt woofer, a new 10-watt tweeter taking up all of that empty space found on the Charge 4, and the Charge 5 still has those dual pass radiators that shoot out its sides. So the reason why this new tweeter on the Charge 5 is a big deal is because it does sound a lot more open than its predecessors, because the mids are now handled by the woofer and the highs are handled by the tweeter. Whereas with the Charge 4, that single transducer is doing the majority of the work. But let me just show you.
Can I be your star tonight? You fill my soul with light the day we met. I don't wanna leave your side. Have me by your side when the sun sets. Let's leave for an eternity. Sail across the lights beyond the sky. Have me by your side when the sun sets. Let's leave for an eternity. We'll sail across the lights beyond the sky. I'll be with you eternally. I'm an addict for your love, it keeps me high.
So after this demo, hopefully you can see how big of a deal this new speaker setup on the Charge 5 is. Being able to separate the mids and highs is just going to allow the Charge 5 to sound more open than its predecessors. But also, due to its new tweeter, the Charge 5 does have a brighter sound signature this time around, very similar to the JBL Extreme 3. But so that you can hear for yourself, we're going to jump into the sound test.
The truth is a damn hard pill to swallow. I'm reaching out, but all I feel is hollow. I wanna make you work, but all I do is make you worse. The truth is a damn hard pill to swallow. Don't you wanna come on over? Don't you wanna work it out? Don't you wanna love me better, love me better, love me now? Don't you wanna fix our problems? Baby, I can show you how. Don't you wanna love me better, love me better, love me now? Don't you wanna come on over? Don't you wanna work it out?
So, like you may have just heard, the Charge 3 sounds very narrowed when compared to the Charge 4 and especially the Charge 5. The Charge 3 also has the least amount of punch to its bass, and this is to be expected given that the Charge 3 doesn't have as much output as the Charge 4 and Charge 5. However, I do gotta say that the Charge 4 and Charge 5 do have the same amount of punch in their bass. Now, like I mentioned multiple times already, the Charge 5 does sound more open than the Charge 4 because it can separate its mids and highs thanks to its new woofer and tweeter setup. Specifically, the highs are much crisper thanks to the tweeter, but they are more pronounced. So, the Charge 5 does have a brighter sound signature than its predecessor, which does allow the vocals to really stand out here. But also, the new brighter sound signature on the Charge 5 means that it does sound a little louder than the Charge 4 as well. Now personally, I would like to go in and reduce the highs just a little bit on the speaker, but JBL still doesn't allow you to change your speaker's EQ. Nonetheless, the Charge 5's slightly brighter EQ does come in handy when used outdoors, because with a brighter sound signature, your music is going to travel out farther. However, just keep in mind, you are not going to get a performance bump out of this speaker if you were to use it while it's plugged in, like you do with the JBL Extreme 3, which also charges via a USB-C port. But finally, let's talk about speaker pairing protocols. Now that the Charge 5 is finally here, Partyboost is complete. So you can pair the Charge 5 either to a JBL Boombox 2, an Extreme 3, a Flip 5, another Charge 5, or to a JBL Pulse 4. And like I mentioned in the past, JBL does speaker pairing protocols very well. You just press one button on each speaker and they just pair themselves up. You don't gotta open any other apps. You can pair up to 100 speakers together, which is obviously overkill. But more importantly, it just works. However, just keep in mind, you cannot pair any Partyboost speakers to any JBL speakers that are either using JBL Connect Plus or JBL Connect. So if you've got a Charge 5, you can't pair it up to an original boombox, a Extreme 2, a JBL Flip 4, a Charge 4, a Charge 3, or a JBL Pulse 3. Now, even though this isn't ideal, there are some performance benefits with Partyboost over JBL Connect Plus. Specifically, you can have a lot more range in between your speakers. And for my Partybox owners, no, you cannot pair any JBL Partyboost speakers to any Partyboxes, which I do feel is unfortunate because I think it would be pretty cool and pretty useful if you could pair up a Charge 5 up to, let's say, a Partybox 310. But now that the Partyboost family is finally complete, does that mean we're going to see a new speaker pairing protocol come out with the next JBL speaker to be announced, which personally I hope is a new Flip 6 with a tiny little tweeter. Personally, I hope JBL doesn't come out with a new speaker pairing protocol, because when we went from JBL Connect Plus to Partyboost, it did look and feel like planned obsolescence, and the community really didn't like that. Personally, I would like to see JBL to continue to support Partyboost and bring Partyboost to their Partybox lineup. This way, you can easily sync up multiple Partyboxes together and even pair them up to JBL's smaller speakers. And instead of forcing people to upgrade with a new speaker pairing protocol, you can incentivize them to upgrade with improved speaker setups like you did with the Charge 5, add new software features like an adjustable EQ, improve battery life, and maybe even introduce wireless charging. Maybe even add reverse wireless charging. But with all that being said, at first glance the JBL Charge 5 may seem like a simple redesign, but there are some major changes here. The most crucial of which is this new speaker setup. Thanks to the addition of a new tweeter, this speaker does sound more open and has better instrument separation because it now has a dedicated driver for the mids and a dedicated driver for the highs. Although, just like the Extreme 3, the Charge 5 does have a slightly brighter sound signature, which does put an emphasis on the vocals, but it does come in handy when used outdoors. But nonetheless, the Charge 5 sounds good. There's also the addition of Partyboost, meaning that the Partyboost family is complete. So overall, if you're an adventurer looking for a mid-sized speaker to use on your camping trips and or hikes, then the Charge 5 can definitely keep up thanks to its rugged body and long real-world battery life. However, just keep in mind you can no longer use a wired connection with the speaker. Personally, I would happily trade the USB-A port on the Charge 5 for an audio jack. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick another products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.